afternoon, everyone. What a wonderful, powerful day, huh? And that last panel is a tough one to follow up on, but I am deeply confident in my three colleagues up here. My name is John Tyler. I'm the General Counsel, Secretary, and Chief Ethics Officer for the Ewing Kauffman Foundation, but I also have done quite a bit of thinking, writing, teaching on the role of foundations in society, role of philanthropy in society, and the history of philanthropy. So as Julie mentioned, you know, the focus of this panel goes back, really begins colonial era, but connects through our founding documents, specifically reminding folks about the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution. We the people, which is its own claim for service and call to service, of the United States in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We are their posterity. We are also the ourselves and the posterity that comes after us. And you know, several of those bullet points very much emphasize service and community and private initiative for the public good. And of course, there's the declaration, the closing line of the declaration: we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. And some of the ways the signers did that in a context of service, they founded the signers, and individual signers and some groups founded 13 colleges and universities. They founded 2 preparatory academies. Education was important to the signers. And of course, Ben Franklin with Pennsylvania, Princeton with Witherspoon and others actually, but also the predecessor for the University of Georgia, the College of Charleston, Dickinson College, some lesser known institutions that our founders, the signers, were involved with starting. 7 of the signers were teachers, another form of service and dedication to community. They started formal organizations, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, libraries, hospitals, medical dispensaries, the Chamber of Commerce, the New York Chamber of Commerce was started by a founder. But they also engaged in less formal structures of service and community, things like abolition. And of course, Franklin and Dr. Rush founded the Pennsylvania Society for promotion of abolition. But they worked in informal ways as well: prison reform, education reform, temperance, against capital punishment, in favor of women's rights and suffrage, support for veterans. These are all things that the signers did not as pledge. The pledge was a reflection of their commitment, and it was in writing that they testified to that, really. So I'm excited to have Dr. Trygve with me. I'm going to do very brief titles, really. Dr. Trygve is the National Civics Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and a research professor in higher education, and the Associate Director of the Center for Economic and Civic Learning at Ball State University. Dr. Deborah Schron is a Senior Manager of the John Lewis Leadership Program, among other things. And actually, I'd say among other things for all 3 here. Dr. Joy Kinard is the Chair of the Division of Political History at the National Museum of American History, and previously had been the superintendent of the Central Alabama Civil Rights Sites, Montgomery, Selma, and also the Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers Monument, which I have some fondness for, being from Missouri. So let's get to you all here. And this first question is for all 3 of you to respond to. Throughout our history, from before the nation's founding, so our history is colonial and through today, service has been a fundamental means of providing bridges. It has been bridge building, bridge tearing down and rebuilding. As bridging, it's been a way to build towards genuine political and civic responsibility, essentially a bridge to democratic engagement. Its service as a bridge has been a stabilizer. Bridges provide stability in getting one place to another. In that way, it's a bridge to, across community, within community. It's also been a bridge even within the sector. There are bridges across the sector given, or within the sector, given lines of diverse thinking, sometimes conflicting thinking and interests, but a lot of times compatible as well. So for each of you, and perhaps Dr. Joy, starting with you, what are your thoughts on the role of service in building bridges, but also, so in building the bridges, but also in developing people to be those bridge builders, part of which we heard in the last panel?
Thank you for that question, and thank you everyone for staying for this panel. I know you've had a wonderful day with a lot of amazing things that have been discussed. I feel like as a museum curator, we have tons of objects at the Smithsonian Institution. They speak to you when you walk through the door. And when you see Thomas Jefferson's desk that he wrote the Declaration of Independence on, when you see the Bible of Richard Allen, the famous theologian, when you see the coat that Hosea Williams wore on the Pettus Bridge, right next to John Lewis, they speak to you. And one thing I feel is that when we look at service, we look at these objects in a different type of way. And so when you say stabilizer, it's a training ground service. It's an opportunity for people to really make connection. And it's also an opportunity for people to have a sense of self-esteem, an opportunity to really bridge gaps where there's dysfunction, where there's differences in opinion, like General Grant and Robert E. Lee. There are so many examples of how we look at Americans, citizens, and what they've contributed to this country, being an example of how service can be expanded. And as we look at John Lewis, as we look at people who were discussed earlier, it's just an amazing opportunity for us to see how the civil rights movement and other movements in the United States set a platform to expand what we know of now as service. When we look at Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the women in the voting rights movement that didn't just start in the 1960s, but just knowing too that when women got the right to vote, it didn't necessarily mean Black women. And so when we look at service in this broad spectrum, it has been, there have been so many opportunities to see examples of how in the margins, those people have come together and expanded the words of what Thomas Jefferson wrote 250 years ago.
Thank you, and in many ways, I mean, you've set that up, bridging across time, bridging from prior times to present times to future times. Dr. Deborah.
And by the way, Deborah is just fine. As a former English teacher, I love a metaphor, and I will extend it all the way. So we're going to be talking about bridges this whole time. But as an educator, I also think a lot about our history curriculum, whose stories we tell and whose stories we don't, and who gets to show up in our curriculum as an individual with a name, and who shows up as a group, as perhaps a generalized monolith. And so as I was listening to this question, I was thinking about a name. A name came to my heart. Anna Ross Baker came to my mind. Anna Ross Baker was born in 1870 to formerly enslaved parents in North Carolina. She was born during a time when, often the Reconstruction era is called our second founding, right, by some historians. A time when we briefly achieved a multiracial democracy and extended the promises of the founding documents you just read to Black Americans and to all Americans. And of course, Anna Ross Baker lives through the violent backlash against Reconstruction and the violent restriction of Black rights to participate, Black men's rights to participate in our political institutions. Anna Ross Baker becomes a school teacher. She becomes a leader in her church. She becomes a pillar of her community. She becomes involved in all of the kinds of service activities that aspiring class Black women of her era would have been involved in. And she has a daughter named Ella. And her daughter grows up seeing her mother engaging in her community, shaping her community, having a voice in her community when the rights of people who look like her were being violently stripped away. And Ella Baker goes on to become referred to now by many historians as the mother of the civil rights movement. She became a leader who believed deeply in the power of ordinary people to shape our institutions, who believe deeply in the democratic principle that individuals are the experts of their own lived experience. And when we invite that expertise into our institutions, they become more just. So I think about the service of someone like Anna Ross Baker as a bridge to the kind of civic engagement that Ella Baker stepped into and opened up for so many more. Ella Baker, of course, became the mentor to John Lewis and to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so I promised I was going to torture that metaphor. And so, when I think about the bridge, this past summer, me and my students from John Lewis High School were standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We were standing there together to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act and the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we stood there with people who had put their bodies on the line, some as teenagers, on Bloody Sunday, to fight for voting rights for all. And so, these examples of service and of advocacy, of bridging the gaps of our institutions when they fail to fulfill the promises in our founding documents, these examples light the way for my students to create the change that they hope to see in the world.
Thank you. Well said.
Wonderful.
Dr. Trygve?
Yes, and Trig is just fine. Well, I think the two stories we just heard demonstrate just how much potential service has to build bridges and to develop bridge builders for our democracy, but only if we tell a rich story of service and a richer story of democracy than we often hear. Service, I think, of the kind that was just described is not just altruism. It's not sacrifice for someone else. It's not noblesse oblige. And I don't think democracy is what we often think of it. It's not just fighting for a just outcome or ensuring that your personal rights or privileges or opportunities are preserved. I think service and democracy both we need to think of as a form of civic politics. It's people who take time to reflect on their self-interests and their values, reflect on those of others and the larger public interests and values that create the social world they inhabit, and work with those people to find a way forward that helps everybody thrive as much as possible. And I think that includes, by the way, thinking of service not just as volunteering, not just as charity, but as people who work. And I don't mean just doctors and teachers and the wonderful people we think of as in service occupations. To go back to the civil rights era, some of the most important citizenship schools in the African American freedom struggle were beauty parlors and barbershops. These were people who were getting paid to cut and style hair and decided, you know what? We're also going to have a conversation about what are our rights, despite what other people are telling us they're not. How can we use our purchasing power to make change? How can we take seriously what Dr. King and some of these other people down in Atlanta and elsewhere are saying and fight for what we deserve while also treating other people, even our enemies, as human beings that we have to find a way to live with? I think we need to recover those stories of service, those rich, variegated stories of service, of people just doing their best to align their self-interests their passions, their desire for a personally rewarding life with their desire to have a publicly meaningful life. That's the story of service we need to tell. Those are the experiences of democracy that service can give young people and old people alike. And then I think we can develop not only people with the skills to build bridges, but we can create larger conditions and expectations so that the people who are in government and are operating in that relatively, I would say, small, important, but small sphere of our democratic process are expected and habituated to being those bridge builders themselves. And I'll make one final point. This kind of civic politics is really the kind of popular complement to what Madisonian federalism envisioned. We have this idea that Madison's idea of federalism was, let's just balance selfish competing factions against each other so that they cancel each other out. But as historians like Lance Banning and my friend and mentor Jim Kloppenberg have argued for years, the type of deliberative decision-making and action that Madison hoped the federal machinery of government would help facilitate was one that was generative and creative, that brought people together not just to cut a pie in half or to be satisfied with some weird Frankenstein of the pieces of whatever they wanted coming in, but a way that they could create a new way forward that everyone had some sort of say in and voice in and hand in creating. So I think service can be a critical bridge to help us overcome this binary, I think, between self-interest and public interest, between what democracy as what people do every day with the people they live with, and democracy as what government does.
So in many ways, what I think all three of you have said in part, service is not something that we do to, and the founders, the signers, did not do service to the country. It was, they were in, of, and for community, and service is, that's inherent in service. So Deborah, a question for you, thinking about the revolutionary in our history, and you raised Anna Ross Baker, an ordinary person, actually an extraordinary person, but throughout history, there have been some just fabulous examples of ordinary people, and I would contend several of the signers were ordinary people. Some of them were extraordinary in a variety of ways, but ordinary people asserting and pursuing their right, their duty, their responsibility to proactively be involved with and shape their communities. And in a lot of ways then through that, our society and our government. And very much, and thinking back to the Revolutionary era, the founding documents and the Enlightenment principles that in some ways I've just laid out, but more clearly, equality, liberty, self-determination, private initiative for the public good. So Deborah, how have those beliefs then, but now, and in between, helped contribute to the foundation of volunteerism and civic responsibility that we have today?
That is such a rich question. I want to start with your point about ordinary people. And I'm sitting next to a Smithsonian leader, and so I want to tell a Smithsonian story. We in the Lewis Leadership Program, we're a bilingual Spanish-English program. We're a majority Hispanic school, and every year we have a special partnership with the Smithsonian Museum of the American Latino. Our students were among the first to visit the Presente exhibition when it opened, and so I have a story from that. We got to go to the Presente exhibition, which of course is in both Spanish and English. We got, facilitated experience with the docents, the museum educators there. And when our students, and by the way, our students were at the second phase of their community action projects, and I'll tell you all about that in a minute. So they're trying to figure out, who am I, what do I care about, what change do I want to create in the world? And they're kind of moving through. And they see photographs and artifacts from the mutual aid societies that Latino immigrants, Cuban immigrants in Tampa, the Afro-Latino community there, our Puerto Rican immigrants in New York City, mutual aid societies that they had set up to step into the gap or bridge the gap of our institution's failure to extend resources to all. And they saw these examples, took photos of them, brought them back, and said, this is what we want to do. Like, we have been thinking about the issues that our immigrant peers and ourselves as immigrants face. And we see this example from the past that you can do it. Communities can solve their own problems. We can come together and figure out what is it that we need and how can we help one another. And so that trip to the Smithsonian Museum was a great illustration of the ways in which the stories that we tell about our past open up doors for our students to step into the agency that they already have, right? But that we need to make space for. And so I think a little bit about the pedagogy that makes that possible. Yeah, I think one of the themes I feel like I'm taking away from our rich day together is that service is a laboratory for civic agency. Anna Ross Baker is a great example of moments of crisis in our democracy when individuals do not have the opportunity to fully participate in formal roles in our institutions. Service is a way for them to create and step into roles to shape their communities. And service often becomes a precursor to more formal forms of activism and advocacy, like the ones you described. And so I see that in action with our students. Our students really have embraced the disability justice motto of nothing about us without us. And so our community action projects, when students are designing their service projects, they have 5 phases. They start with, who am I? What do I care about? What are my values? They move into a community inventory. We take community walks. We do dialogical interviews. Often our senior center will send a busload of elders over to our school. Some of you have been involved in that day. It's quite a beautiful day, and we have intergenerational conversations about our community's changes over time. And so we try to learn about our community's strengths as well as its needs from the diverse people who make up our community, but who often we don't get the chance to connect meaningfully with. And so our young people are able to connect across age, across culture, across language. And through that process, the experiences of my students become visible to community members who would normally not have access to that deep understanding of what our young people feel and think and are going through. After the community inventory phase, the students decide, what actions am I trying to take? They start developing their project plan. That's the project planning phase. And I really so deeply appreciated the many speakers today who said we need to stop talking about service and teaching service and just get to the doing, right? I think too often in high school, especially, I know I have a high school age son, it's like, I don't want to sit here and write a worksheet about it. Like, I need to do it, right? I need to experience it. And so this project planning phase is the doing and reflecting. And well-being is a part of that. So wellness, really thinking about, as I am engaging in a difficult project, how do I take action to promote my own wellness and to sustain through these projects? And I think, for that, they learned a lot from John Lewis and John Lewis's family and those who have fought for justice alongside him, who taught my students that service and advocacy are serious work, but joy is what sustains us through it, community building and joy. And so through engaging in these service projects, our students are not just fighting for the world that they want to see, but briefly they get to experience the beautiful world that they want to see, and that helps sustain them through the hard times. And then reflection and exhibition is the final one. And exhibition means like a science fair. They show what they did to our community. And many of you have visited on those days. I say all of that to say that, I think what I am learning from our conversations today is that, service is not a precursor to civic agency for young people, but it is the very act of engaging in shaping the community the way that our students are ready to do. Yeah.
No, well said. Service is not a sequence. It's not a moment. It is what we make it, what we as individuals, we as communities, we as society make. Joy, I want to turn to you, and I appreciate how Deborah indirectly invoked you by saying,
like
Joy.
that. Thank you, Deborah.
I
Thank
thought it
you.
fit very nicely. But you've already hit on this, but the founding documents by operation and implementation left out a lot of people both then and later, and to some degree by operation implementation still now. Those same people and their advocates did not wait for permission,
No, they didn't.
and God bless them for that. And still, they worked through formal channels, they worked through informal channels, they worked through the courts, they invoked the Constitution, they invoked the First Amendment. They persisted through courts that were thinking different things and didn't pay attention to the Enlightenment principles that were found in our documents. But some courts did, and some courts did implement. But I would say as important, and perhaps more important in leading up to the formal ways, were the informal ways in which service and in which historically marginalized people and their supporters and advocates, both together but also in their respective spheres, engaged and changed hearts and minds. And we're still pursuing that. So Joy, what are some of the ways in which those sorts of things we've talked about, and it's already been talked about, but more explicitly, what are some of the ways in which those activities, those behaviors constituted service? And what did it mean? What does it mean? Because it's still active for our nation's reliance and commitment to a democratic republic.
I think it means so much. When we look at people like Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi and how she chose to testify and was a witness to so many issues in her community, we have to look at the First Amendment to the Constitution and how you have to assemble. That's what they did in Selma at the bridge. You have to petition. And there are certain things that come out of that, witnessing, assembling, and letting people know that you have to be included in this thing we call citizenship, which is so fragile, which is so necessary, and the very definition has expanded so much in this country. When you think of Thomas Jefferson and how he owned slaves, when you think of their descendants now being part of the interpretation at Monticello, when you think of so many people who have done so much, like Frederick Douglass speaking out against slavery, speaking for women's rights, these people who help us understand throughout history, we must not ignore. When today we actually had the staff of Senator Warnock come to the museum, and we showed them some objects today. We showed them Alexander Hamilton's desk. We showed them the Trail of Dreams, the shoes that undocumented immigrants wore when they walked from Miami to Washington, D.C. in 2010. We showed them a lectern from a church in Savannah, Georgia, where Wesley Wallace Law, who was the president of the NAACP branch in Savannah, Georgia, gave a legendary speech supporting the desegregation of schools in Savannah, Georgia. So these are some examples of how we can look informally at how people have ushered in this expansion of how we look at citizenship, how we look at togetherness, how we can work together in organizations formally and informally together. When you look at Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist Papers and all he did in the Revolution, I know there's a beautiful play about his life and his contribution, but if that's what it takes to get young people to understand what he contributed, we've got to do more of that. And maybe that's what we do the next 250. Maybe we do a play instead of coming to the arena stage the next 250. But as we look at the informal ways of having conversations like this, having conversations about ideas, that's really how it's changing and how it has changed over time. We keep bringing up people like John Lewis and Dr. King and Ella Baker, but it started with conversations for people to agree to put their lives on the line to make a difference. When we think of Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, and we actually have a deck of cards that she made when she was in jail, when she was a freedom rider, when she was in jail, that she made a deck of cards out of a letter that someone gave her. We actually have it in the collection, and that's going to be in our In Pursuit exhibition that you must come see. But when you think of these informal ways of how people joined the Freedom Riders and chose to be in an environment where they were beaten and cursed out and just treated improperly, just because they wanted to desegregate the transportation industry. There's so many interesting ways. I mean, we can probably sit here right now and say, you know what? I don't know if I could have been a freedom rider. And I'm going to say, maybe I couldn't either. You know, who gets trained to learn how to position yourself so they don't hit your brain, but hit your ear, you know, your skull? You know, those are things that the freedom riders had to teach themselves how to fall when they were getting beaten by the police, so certain organs didn't get traumatized. And so when we think of these informal conversations, when we think of people we look up to who were doing certain things during a certain time, that service energized us and encouraged us to do better. Maybe not what they did, but to support what they did, potentially.
Oh, well said. Trig, I want to pick up on one of the things that you talked about, which is the economic engagement and really service through economic engagement. And I'm thinking about Madam C.J. Walker, Annie Malone, Colonel John McKee, Tommy LaFone, many others. I think Clifton Talbert, who built the Ice House, a wonderful book, a wonderful story. His uncle built the Ice House. He was a black man who had the only working ice house in the community, doing business across everybody. And so that spirit of entrepreneurship, which of course is close to the Kauffman Foundation's heart, and the sacrifice, the persistence, the resilience, the creativity, the innovation, the things that go into that. And I want to bring that part back to you, but perhaps more broadly in thinking about that, what are the notions of the civic habits? And I think engaging in the marketplace can be a civic habit. Private initiative for the public good, are they as strong today as they have been? And if not, how do we reinvigorate it to reignite that spirit of engagement?
Thank you. They are not as widely recognized and celebrated today. And I think one of our tasks is to uplift the stories of people whom I call citizen professionals, who are working not just in the tradition of beauticians and barbers and other folks during the freedom struggle, but in the tradition of Benjamin Franklin and the Leather Apron Club, or the Knights of Labor. There's a wonderful story about the Knights of Labor organizing in Richmond, organizing both white artisans and laborers who felt disenfranchised by the white planter elite, and black artisans and laborers who obviously felt very disenfranchised, not just economically, but in so many other ways by the same people. And they didn't tell people, hey, we have to get together and not care about our wages, not care about advancing ourselves economically. They didn't tell the white laborers, you've got to drop everything you're doing because it is totally unjust that these black folks over here don't have the same rights as you. That's not the approach they took. They tried to find ways to get people to reflect on their self-interests, reflect on their passions, and in face-to-face concrete situations, try to understand how someone they thought was very different from them might actually have something to offer, might actually be an ally in some way. You might not like them, you might not even fully trust them, but you might be able to begin a kind of a more productive relationship that then can grow over time into something more equal. Now, for many, many reasons in the 1880s, that's a scary thing for the white planter class in 1880s Richmond, and they used every opportunity possible to destroy that nascent alliance. But not until after the Knights of Labor ended up electing 2 people to the Richmond City Council. And that was really scary. You know, Benjamin Franklin himself said that property is just a way to equip yourself for a life that is bigger than material gain. Now, he wasn't saying, I'm going to amass property and then give it all away. Benjamin Franklin died a very wealthy man. But he also used his wealth and his passions as a printer, later as a statesman and a public figure, to try to advance causes that were larger than himself. The associational life that Tocqueville celebrates, well, that Tocqueville analyzes in very nuanced way in Democracy in America. This was not a bunch of people just getting together for idealistic purposes. This was people collaborating, saying, okay, I think to advance my own self-interests and those of my kin and my familiar community, I might need to collaborate with some people that I don't really know. We might need to agree on how to use this common field, or how to use this common granary, or how to manage this fishery. I can't just take whatever I want from it, because ultimately that's not going to advance my own interest. And then they began to realize, wait, this is what we're called to do as members of a political community. We have to find a way, as often as possible, to navigate that tension between our self-interests and the larger public interests. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a community that sustains neither of them. I think we are still living in the long shadow of rational choice theory, have been pretty much my entire life, and that teaches us that that kind of talk is crazy talk, or that's from a time gone past. We're just rationalizing maximizers of our personal utility, and if we do that, all of our personal selfish decisions will aggregate into the best society we have a right to expect. I don't think that's true. But I also don't think that the response is to say, no, you need to sacrifice everything for a higher good and be a martyr. I don't think that's effective either. I think you need to do the hard work of saying, how do I lead a personally rewarding and publicly meaningful life? And most of that hard work involves talking to and doing stuff with other people. And there are people in many professions all across this country who do that every day as journalists, as shop owners. I live in Minneapolis. The number of people who altered the way they do business in every single way in January, February this year was remarkable. And it happens in other communities. We just need to tell those stories.
Thank you. So one last question for all 3 of you, starting with you, Deborah. As we think about, and it's building on the last question from the last panel as well, and from others as well, as we think ahead to our nation's next 250 years, what service tradition or civic habit or ideal or principle or perspective from our past, doesn't have to go all the way back, although there's threads that started then and run through today, should we be reinforcing or rediscovering to ensure that our American democracy thrives for another 250 years for and by we the people? So Deborah, and then Trig, and then Joy, you get the last word.
You ask the best questions.
We planned well.
Yeah.
They do have many layers, I will say.
Yes.
questions.
Yes, it takes me on a
Some of
whole
which we
journey.
talked about.
Another name is coming to my mind with that question. Dolores Huerta, the civil rights and labor leader, Dolores Huerta. And here's a humble brag. She visited my students' Museum of Service this year when she joined as a guest speaker. Yeah, thank you. When she joined as a guest speaker at our school, she took some time looking at all the service projects, and then she sat in a community circle with my students, and she shared her own service story with them. I didn't know it. She was a Girl Scout growing up. She grew up in a family that really valued service and really, believed in the idea of connecting with the community, understanding the community, and giving back to the community. But what she talked to my students about was a distinction that has been important in her life between helping people and empowering people. And that is not a mutually exclusive binary. It's not a false binary. We can help people and empower people. But I think what she was offering was, a suggestion that we disrupt a hierarchy that often exists in the service providers and the service recipients. She talked about, as she organized farm workers, well, she started as a school teacher, right? And she saw her students coming in hungry. And then she said, maybe I could be better served getting to the root of this problem. Why are these children hungry and barefoot, and how can I organize their families? And she talked about the need to live among the people that she was working with and to empower them to identify and solve their own problems. And that's an approach to service that perhaps is different from traditional or mainstream narratives around what service can look like. And it felt really powerful to me that she was sitting in community with my students, having this intergenerational conversation about serving and change making. Joy has been talking about these artifacts. Well, there are some artifacts in my students' museum too. You can see them back there. There's a packet of ramen from our food pantry. There's a soccer ball from an intramural soccer league that our students started to foster belonging, especially among newcomer students who are new to the school or even new to the United States and don't know anyone, and students who, for whatever reason, and for so many reasons, don't want to be at school, don't feel a sense of belonging at school. They find their first friendships there. And so that act of service of taking what I'm good at and what I'm passionate about and serving the community. And so I guess as I think about these artifacts that my students are collecting for this museum, and I think about the history that we're telling, I think what I wanted to share is that my students are also part of authoring that history. Those artifacts are part of our American story of service. And what I really deeply appreciate the National Museum and Center for Services initiative is empowering our young people to be authors of the next chapter of American history, agents of change, and those who represent that story for generations to come.
Nicely said. Thank you. Trig.
Question was about civic habits that we need to emphasize.
Yeah, civic habits, ideals, principles from the past that we should reinvigorate or reinforce for the next 250.
I think in arguing about just how idealistic or hypocritical, folks from our past, especially the founding era, might have been, we forget the one thing that I think is actually hard to argue, which is that they really valued intellectual humility. Jefferson, Hamilton, both in their different ways, and most of the people around them in this founding generation were committed to the idea that whatever solutions they came up with today were not going to be perfect and timeless. That's why we have an amendable constitution. It's why we have a federal government that that preserves states and localities as laboratories of democratic culture and governance. That intellectual humility is something we need to teach our students, and we need to teach them that it is not only responsible, but also really empowering. Because if you go into situations with the assumption that you have to make your best decision, but you can learn something from other people and from new experience, then they have hope and power to knowing that the world can always be better than it is. It's not stuck. It's not fixed. I don't think we do. I think we can do a better job when we educate our young people in not just teaching them about that virtue, but structuring educational environments in which they are just forced to develop and practice it over and over and over again. Rather than worrying about are we giving our students the right story of the American past or the right answers to these complicated issues, give them primary materials, give them tough questions, and put them in situations that are supported and scaffolded and coached, but put them in situations where they just have to make meaning of it with their peers. We are not going to have the citizens that we want for tomorrow if we don't treat them like the citizens that we want today. We have to treat them now as the citizens who appreciate and value their autonomy and their interdependence now, or they're not going to be those types of citizens.
Well said.
I think this first 250, we have realized who the people are, who the people are. And in the next 250, we need to work together on understanding how we can work together in a better way. I feel like leadership is the one thing I feel that young people need to expand their horizons on. They can come to the museum and see examples of these leaders of the United States, leaders around the world. We have so many things there and at other museums, but I think that we have to do it with the teachers. We have to do it with the professors. We have to do it with the museums. And I just want to thank you for this opportunity to let people know how we do need time to reflect on where we have been and where we are going. And young people need to understand that.
Yeah, well said. I think all three of you hit on the fact that service is bigger than the word. It is not passive. It is active, and it is proactive, and it's not just physical. It's intellectual, it's emotional, it is outreach, it is intersectional. And I thank all of you for the perspectives, and I thank Independent Sector and the National Museum and Center for giving us a chance to visit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.